Alicia, can you hear us?
I could hear you.
And we can hear you.
Yay.
It's the tiniest little yay. Are we ready? All right, welcome everyone. It is 4 o'clock. It's time for the exciting adventures of the Flagstaff Heritage Preservation Commission here on August 21st, 2024. We will start with a roll call.
Well, that is a lot of energy to follow, Chair.
Woo!
All right. Emily Dale.
Present.
Shelley Day, she's absent. She's excused. Abby Buckham.
Present.
Alicia Hayes.
Present.
Amy Horn. She's excused. Bernadette Bertram.
Present.
Duffy Westheimer. Okay.
Here.
Thank you.
All right, we will now move on to the land acknowledgement, which I will read today. The Heritage Preservation Commission humbly acknowledges the ancestral homelands of this area's indigenous nations and original stewards. These lands, still inhabited by native descendants, border mountains sacred to indigenous peoples. We honor them, their legacies, their traditions, and their continued contributions. We celebrate their past, present, and future generations who will forever know this place as home. We will now move on to public comment. If there are any members of the public who have a comment on an item not listed on the agenda, now is your chance. All right, and seeing as there's no one else online either, we will now move on to the approval of the minutes for July 17th, 2024. Any items, things that need to be amended?
I personally did not find anything significant.
I didn't see anything that needed to be changed, but I think there was a lot that was missing.
Anything in particular that you would like to speak to now to have on the record?
I don't know what I can say.
All right, well, our big agenda item from last week will likely be coming back to us in September, so
That is correct.
if we think of anything else that we would like to reiterate, we'll have a chance to do that next month. So do we have seeing as that there are no amendments, do we have a motion to approve the minutes from last month?
I'll motion to approve the minutes from July 17th.
All right, we have a motion from Commissioner Bertram. Do we have a second?
I'll second that motion.
And a second from Commissioner Buckham. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, it passes. We will now move on to public hearing items, starting with the Level 1 grant application for 823 West Aspen stucco repairs. Sarah, do you have a presentation for us?
I don't have a formal presentation, but you have in your packet the grant application from the property owner, Caitlin Kelly. This is currently on your agenda as a Level 1 grant application. Caitlin tried to find research on if the materials that she is trying to repair on the building are original or not. We were not able, part of Level 2 funding is this really a restoration project? Is it meeting all the Park Service standards for that? We really have not been able to determine if the materials on the building are original or not. However, they have been on there a very, very long time. Long enough they probably fall within the period of significance. So it is an alternative action to ask for an updated preservation summary to be provided and to fund this at Level 2 if you would like. Later on when we talk on the agenda about grants and the historic preservation, historic sign and facade grant overall, I'd like to get some feedback from you on how to handle cases where there is uncertainty as to which level the commission would like to see them funded at. But just to make you aware that this falls in that gray area where we were not able to determine that the stucco was original, but there is enough work to fund Level 2 if you feel that there's evidence sufficient to support that, or that's your preference as a commission. With that in mind, I would, are there any questions for me based on the staff summary? And if not, I'd hand the mic to the property owner to make any comments or answer any other questions she could answer.
I have a question about that. You gave us a report of how much money there is available, right? So if this were to be deemed eligible for level 2, this report wasn't perfectly clear to me. Like, I don't feel like I really get it, but how much would be left, considering we're at the beginning of the funding year? How much would be left for future projects coming before us?
I think it would be about, if you, I'll just answer that. If the new grant request is approved and the extensions that are on the agenda today, I believe there'd still be about $75,000 left for the year. And I know that one of the grants that's being paid out very soon is not going to need the full amount. They didn't spend the full level 2 funding. So that's always a consideration too. But purely on the merits of this application, it was unclear. So we put it at level 1 and we're giving you the option of funding at level 2. I'm gonna start making the amount of grant money available and what's being paid out and what is pending part of a regular report that you get every month, instead of it being kind of hard to track throughout the year. So we'll get into more details of that when we get to that agenda item, but I wanted you to have a sense of how much funding there is. We are at the beginning of the year. You have approved 1 grant already this fiscal year, and we never know how many more we're gonna get, right? Everybody could come from, July to November, and we don't see anybody else till next June. That happens some years. Sometimes it's really steady all year, and sometimes they're all in the winter. It's just, there's never been 2 years that the pattern has been the same, unfortunately. So I'm not really good at predicting the future of what grant applications we might see coming forward.
Would it be possible to fund it at like a level 1 and then with continued investigation into this property, have it come back for additional funding, or is it just like a one and done kind of deal?
It's really at your discretion. The commission is who decides what's funded and with how much flexibility. The only thing that's really clear in the guidelines on timing is that once you've asked for your 1-year extension, we don't offer you a second 1-year extension. You need to come back in and reapply as a new grant in the future year. So I would think if you wanted to fund it at level 1, and said if you're starting to go over that cost and you want to come back, then we can have people come back and say, I need an extra $3,000 or need an extra 8. Because we haven't had 2 levels of funding before this year, we don't really have procedures for that. So we welcome your feedback so we can offer applicants some clarity as well.
So is the only potential roadblock in your mind as to why you aren't sure is that it's not 100% clear if the stucco is original to the house, but we know the stucco has been there for a very long time.
Yes.
So it falls within the historic time period of the neighborhood.
I think I'd let the property owner answer
Okay.
the more detailed questions, since she did the research
Okay.
and just discussed it with me.
Okay, and then I guess the other question I have is, one of the other conditions of the level 2 funding was that the HPO would help oversee to make sure that everything was being done up to those standards. With Mark gone, are you filling in for that role?
Yes.
Okay,
That's me.
and you feel comfortable? Okay.
Yes, with stucco and window repair, yes.
Okay, I just wanted to verify before we start.
If it were complicated, I might have to, and always I can, seek additional technical assistance from SHPO.
Okay, just in case this question comes up again before the position is filled. Commissioner Westheimer, looked like you had a question.
I might be able to connect the owner with a family member to find out how long she knows the stucco's been there. She's in her 80s.
Yeah, I would let her come up and make her remarks and answer property owner questions if you're ready.
Yeah, are there any other questions for Sarah?
Commissioner Hayes has her hand up.
Oh, yes, Commissioner Hayes.
I was just gonna say, I agree with what Emily said about, if there's a possibility to do this at a level 1 now and then maybe later at a level 2. Also, the question is whether the house originally had stucco as how it was designed and built, or whether the stucco is original, because stucco's cyclic in nature. I would think that it's probably been tore off and redone a couple times, or it's probably in bad shape if it's that old.
Yeah, it needs repair. I think that the issue is we don't know if it was wood clad and later replaced with stucco, which we see from time to time in these neighborhoods. But we also do see homes that were originally stucco and are stucco. It's hard to tell from the outside without actually pulling things off and doing further investigation.
Well,
Right,
and
thank
maybe
you.
that would make itself clear as the stucco is removed to be restuccoed.
Correct.
All right, former Commissioner Kelly, would you like to provide any additional context?
Well, I'm just excited to be here. Thank you for reviewing, and it's just been a long process, so I'm just excited. I've been researching and meeting with contractors and dreaming about doing this project for a very long time. I've lived on the property for nearly 15 years. This is for the one parcel that has the 3 stucco buildings, and there was a question about age that I'll just address. I know you have the language from Ann Mickelbaugh, and she says the L-shaped building is the apartment building, and she says by the early 1940s that building had been converted into the 3 apartments, which it still is 3 apartments now. So my best guess is that in the early 1940s it was stucco, but I have not tried to take anything off yet, honestly, because I was afraid of what I might find. I'm not the professional to do that. I've met with multiple contractors, and I felt very, very confident with the estimate that I presented you from Outback Stucco. He's done multiple homes in the downtown area, and his work to me seems very professional, and he was not afraid of the project. I've had a few come, and I just did not feel confident with, anyways, I just felt like he knew what he was getting into. He liked the property, and I don't want to change anything, I don't want to tear anything down, I don't want to add anything. I just want it to look a lot prettier and to bring it back to life a little bit, give it the love that it needs. I don't know if that was what I was supposed to say, so I'm happy to answer any questions.
I'm curious if at any point you find that there is structural work that is damaged. Are you prepared to deal with it?
Absolutely. I expect that. Amongst other things, yes. And of course, I mean, there is like the level 1, level 2, and when I sat on the board, it was only level 1, the commission, sorry. And so I asked for the level 1 because I just want to follow the rules. But of course, the more help that I can get, the more that I can do, and the better I can do it. So I promise to communicate with the commission and if anything that I do find, but it is just important to me to do it right and to do it well.
Have you talked to the stucco guy? I'm sure he has a name, but I forget what it is. About whether or not he would be able to discern any past repairs or, whether or not it was originally stucco. Is that something he would be able to?
It didn't come up I didn't really ask him about if he was going to be able to find out if it was original or not. It just didn't come up.
Okay. Yeah, I was just, just thinking if there is a way to offer level 1 funding, and then if
Right.
you discover, oh, hey, there's just like insulation under here, clearly, like it was always a stucco building, then, that would be more evidence to come back with. But
Okay.
that's not necessarily the way I would rule. I'm just thinking things out in my head.
Well, I appreciate that you want to keep what's there, because that family's really important in Flagstaff history in that neighborhood.
Thanks.
As I'm looking kind of over the project description and all of the things that it needs, it says for stucco repair, but I assume that we are also being able to fix other issues with this money, including what the fascias and the gutters and the window trim, and it looks like there's more than just stucco, correct?
Yes. And the reason why I presented it the way that I did is because I have a bid for stucco, and then he prepared a second bid for all the other work that goes into it, which he is also doing. He's doing all of it. And I just wanted to keep my application clean. And since I was only asking for the 10 and the stucco was 25, but I do have his bid for an additional $15,000 for all the other work that's going to go into it. And I'm happy to share that. I just, since I wasn't applying for a level 2, I wanted to keep it simple. And his bid there was a lot of issues.
I guess my question is with this specific grant, the money can only be used for the stucco repair and not the rest? Yes, Sarah?
It would depend on how you want to make the motion. If you make the motion that it can only be done on the stucco repair, then that's all that it would be eligible for. But since the property owner acknowledges their other work, you can say the stucco and fascia and other trim repair. And then that would give her some flexibility on what receipts she could submit. And also, she could provide, without coming back to you, any kind of revised budget to the HPO. But if you were going to raise the money amount from 10 to 20, then we would need to come back into a motion.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. But the stucco alone, the estimate is 25, you're saying? Okay, okay,
Yes,
thank you.
of course.
Can we see the rest of the budget, just?
Absolutely. Just bring it up. Okay.
You've been asked to approach.
I have no doubt it's well over $25,000. I just oh yeah. So, yeah, it looks like all the extras are new metal for the roof shingles on the porch, tearing off, stuccoing the doors so they match the walls, fascia, it's fascia and medicine. Posts for the porches, rotted wood soffits, sealing and painting the windows, reattaching the rain gutter, which is for $15,000.
And I think it's important, if I may, that it is more important to list the type of work, because the grant guidelines state that we can't reimburse for work that wasn't approved as part of your accepting, or, basically approving the grant. So, but if there are financial side things, those can be dealt with administratively as long as it's not an increase. That we would bring back to you. But if she did, I feel like it could be questionable if we gave someone a grant for stucco and they did other work and then came back and asked for the level 2. So if you want to give that flexibility for future decision-making, I would verbally list the work you want to be eligible for the grant, and then say it's at the up to $10,000 amount, and then we can come back if we'd like to provide more receipts and go to level 2. Does that seem like a good process? I'm totally winging that because we don't have a process for this. But I think that would fall within the grant guidelines without any question.
Well, I think too, there's also the question of if he pulls off the stucco, and as Commissioner Westheimer pointed out, there's other issues underneath, that would obviously also up the cost and potentially increase the need for a level 2 kind of funding. So I think the idea of starting with level 1, because that's what all the paperwork currently is officially for, is the stucco repair, and then an increased amount later if a new application, I don't know.
You could just say if additional work is necessary or something, additional related work is necessary.
Yeah.
Or something along those lines. But if you put that flexibility in the motion, we would know based on this discussion And we can include in the minutes some of what was mentioned as being eligible.
So I feel like in a way, some of this is backwards because some of that structural work would have to be done if it needs to be done before the stucco should be done. And so I do support providing additional, because she is keeping the structure in the form that it's been in since at least the 40s, we believe, and respecting the materials. The thing is, I've seen the property, the windows are not the original, so I wouldn't support anything to, I don't know, other than making the windows, I don't know, secure or but I guess I'm getting to the point that I support helping to fund the structural work that really needs to be done to make it worth restuccoing.
So you would support level 2 funding right off the bat?
So long as we say what it's used for and we don't just make it a blanket.
Word general language like structural work related to the stucco repair?
Yeah, I think you could say any structural work discovered upon removal of stucco could be included right away. If you did choose to go to level 2, I will probably request the property owner provide a revised preservation budget summary so that we know what we're working off of, but that's a way, she can amend the application that way after your motion.
And Caitlin, are you prepared to take on all the Secretary of the Interior standards and stuff that the level 2 funding requires?
I believe so, yes.
Okay, I just wanted to be like, here's more money and also all these strings. I just wanted to verify with you.
With some hand-holding, yes.
Yeah.
For example, I think that make the water heater room nicer looking inside and add drywall. We don't need to pay for that. Paint the windows, we don't need to necessarily pay for that, and seals. Figure out roof leak, yes, that's important, you know. Hanging the gutter, that'll take care of the stucco in the future. Things like that make sense to me. But some of the things, I think if this bid were itemized, that would help to identify the things that are structural when we have to make that decision, because maybe it won't go all the way to level 2. You know, it won't be the full 20,000, it might be 18 total.
Commissioner Hayes, you had your hand up.
My question was answered.
All right, any other questions for the applicant or Sarah? Any other thoughts on level 1 or level 2 funding?
I know that it's going to need more work. I am comfortable with doing level 1 with structural changes that might come up and related to the stucco. And then, you know, if we always want to go to level 2 later, it seems like that's not the biggest inconvenience.
Sarah, that's okay to do in our motion?
I believe so, because we don't have anything that says you can't. And so, I think the key things in the guidelines are to make sure you outline what kind of work you'd want to be reimbursing for, so that if it comes back, it's not unauthorized work. And and then, we can take it from there. And then maybe and if you say working with the HPO, then I'll work on getting a revised budget summary.
Okay, well, maybe we can just leave it as the motion is now for the stucco repair. And then would you want us to add something along the lines of, and if further structural repairs are needed, we will consider a level 2 proposal?
Yep, that would be great.
Okay. Someone write that down?
But it seems like
Someone has to make the motion, then we'll write it down.
Sorry, it seems that we're expecting there to be structural issues with the stucco. Is that correct?
Or if there is evidence that the stucco is original to the house.
And to clarify too, he doesn't intend to remove the current stucco.
Oh, I don't know how stucco works.
It's gonna just be prettier new stucco on top.
I'm from Washington. All the stucco melts, so no one has it.
If he finds the stucco is not stable, is he prepared to take it off and replace it? And are you prepared for that? Because that could be part of a level 2.
I'm prepared to do it no matter what.
She'll be out there
I have been
stuccoing the house
staring
herself.
at that crumbly building for 15 years. I'm ready.
Well, that would be part of structural issues. Bad stucco. Does that mean your house just gets thicker every year? You re-stucco it? It gets bigger? Okay.
Who's brave enough to make a motion?
Well, and not to overcomplicate, I didn't even look into a different type of siding, because I could, do that, but I didn't think that would be appreciated, so it's just always been a subject of stucco in my mind.
And we appreciate that. Any other
Have
thoughts?
you looked inside the walls at all? Has there been any assessment of what's behind the stucco that might let you know if there is structural issues, or that the stucco is on usually lathe or chicken wire? I imagine it's lathe for a house, that it's in good shape, or anything along that line?
There's been a few areas where the stucco has fallen off, but because of the age of the building, there are different things in different places. So sometimes there's chicken wire behind it, and sometimes there is not.
What a mystery.
Yeah. I just to suggest this, because it's free. I have used cameras to look behind building walls or into walls before, and you can go to AutoZone and put a deposit down and check out a snake camera, and you can put it in a wall and take a look, and it has like an iPad kind of screen. You can see what's behind there. Has a light. Just something you might want to do.
Okay. My gut says that sounds terrifying, but okay.
It's like a little camera on a bendable
yeah.
metal.
I'm just afraid of what I would
kind of-
find, is what I mean.
That's how you end up on forensic files. All right, well, this alternative action is also on here with some nice wording. Property owner has additional repairs that are not included. Commission may request that those repairs be added to the application. So I think Sarah has provided us with some other language. And just because we say we're going to shoot if the applicant applies for level 2 funding, doesn't mean that they're guaranteed to get it.
Right, it
We
does
would just-
you have to have the receipts to
Yeah.
get the full funding.
Yeah, we'd just be offering an avenue.
So how can I help?
The enthusiasm from this, from the beginning of this meeting.
It's really taking a dip, guys.
All right. So it sounds like we're all on board for the full 10,000. We're just a little bit stuck on what exactly the extra 10,000 would cover. Correct? Does that seem like a fair assessment of what people have been saying?
I think that I
Yes.
think I heard agreement that structural things would be covered.
And we have to specifically list what those structural things are? Or, I know we said additional related work earlier. Can we just say additional related structural work? Or does it need to be more specific, Sarah?
If you make it clear to me what you mean, then I will follow up accordingly. So, I mean, if you wanted to make it broader, the additional work could be, they find that that roof leaks really big and integrated to the wall, and that's putting the structure at risk. And basically, you'd be leaving the admin staff to help make some judgment calls on that, which we often do have to do. So, you can choose how flexible to be. You can read off of the list of things that she already has a bid for and then just add structural if you want to be that detailed, or you could just say additional work including structural.
I would almost just say additional work including structural, because there's probably, I mean, this is a good list here. So she's definitely going to exceed the $10,000, and we don't know what's under the stucco or what's going to happen, so. And then maybe not to be so specific, to be somewhat vague, I think.
Is that if we were to approve the $20,000?
Oh, I was just asking about the 10. I thought that we were cool with the 10, but leaving the level 2 open.
Well, I think for the 10, it would just be the stucco, because the stucco is 25, and so that's double the amount, which is what we require. And so if it was just the 10, and then we would see level 2 funding, I don't think we need to be specific, right? Because that would be a separate conversation.
You do have to at least list the work, because the guidelines state that we can't reimburse for work that's already been completed and wasn't included in the original motion.
But if we're not, so if we're just saying $10,000 for stucco repairs, which is what this motion says, but we would be willing to look at a list of things for level 2 funding in the future, do we need to make a list of those things we would look at? Because we would then be talking about them when they were before us.
Yeah, I don't think it has to be that specific. I mean, that's personally, how specific or general you are in a motion is, an area of grayness, right? And so this discussion's told me we're interested in if there's anything structural to come back for level 2, if there's anything with the roofing, or she finds major rot or something else that puts the structure at risk, then we would want to see a level 2 funding request to complete the grant. Is that correct? That's what
Yes.
I heard. So,
Okay.
so a motion that's in that ballpark will get us there.
Okay, I mean, do we even need to say that we will consider level 2 funding? Does that even need to be part of the motion?
You do. Because
Okay.
if you don't, then it's only stucco that's eligible. Does that
Okay.
make sense? You have to list the work you're
Okay.
willing to reimburse.
Okay, because then if we see the level 2 funding, then the stucco gets added to the cost of it. But if we don't say that, then it's like it's a separate application.
Correct.
Okay,
Good question.
all right. Does that clarify things for people? Would someone like to make a motion?
I will try this. I will motion to approve a level 1 grant for up to $10,000 for stucco repair at 823 West Aspen Avenue, with the option to move to level 2 grant if their stucco requires more repairs and structural issues related to the stucco. Does that work, Sarah? Yes. Okay.
All right, we have a motion from Commissioner Bertram. Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
A second from Commissioner Westheimer. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Well,
Thank you.
maybe we'll see you again.
And just to clarify, so the level 2 is only for additional issues that come up with the stucco, not for any of the other items listed. Is that what I heard?
Well, I would imagine things like a leaky roof would be impacting the stucco's integrity.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Does that make sense, Sarah?
Yes,
Yeah.
but not that list.
Yeah, and as Duffy pointed out, if the windows aren't original, like that can't be part of the level 2 grant because that doesn't meet the Secretary for Interior standards and things like that.
Okay, okay. Well, thank you. I'll send pictures when it's done. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah, for holding our hands through that.
Well, it's coming up next month too, just so you know, it's
Okay.
not always easy to make the call between 1 and 2. So maybe we'll do some trial and error to see how you like to approach these things, and then I'll have we'll be more consistent once we figure it out a little.
Thank you, Caitlin, for being our guinea pig. All right, we will now move on to item B, 2 sign and facade grant extensions. I think we should tackle these individually since the properties are different and they have different owners and different reasons. So let's start with the 1625 North Sunset Drive property.
Yes, the construction work at 1625 North Sunset Drive is underway. They just have not submitted receipts and their grant expired in July. So we should have brought you this in July, but we were in a transition and so we didn't catch it. I was on vacation too, so double didn't catch it. But we have communicated with the property owner and so they will be done with the work this fall and be submitting receipts.
And basically, it was just they couldn't get the materials that they needed within the time frame.
I don't know if it was the materials or the work, but it's, you know, a somewhat regular thing to see some delays still, unfortunately. It's becoming less common, but there are many reasons.
Okay, I just remember them specifically giving a reason as to why they hadn't finished the work. Does anyone else remember that?
Yeah, they're a mid-century modern building, so they ordered some specialized materials that were particular to the era of their building.
Yes, they had a delay in acquiring a hard-to-source siding, and so they weren't able to finish till August. All right, other questions or comments on 1625? Do we have a motion?
I will make a motion to approve a one-year extension for historic signs and facades grant originally issued July 16th, 2023 at 1625 North Sunset Drive.
All right, do we have a second?
I'll second
I will
that
second
motion.
that.
Ooh, 2 seconds. All right, we have a motion from Commissioner Buckham and seconds from Commissioners Bertram and Hayes. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, we will now move on to the grant extension request for 416 South San Francisco.
Yes, so 416 South San Francisco has not yet started construction. This is a pretty small grant. It's for re-stuccoing a building. If you'll recall, they had found like the Kingdom Hall sign. There's the original meeting place of Jehovah's Witnesses in the south side. I'm not quite sure what the delay has been, but they definitely said they're still planning to go forward with the project. So, but they will need an extension if you want to consider having it funded because they've run out of the first year of time.
So just to clarify, they have not provided a reason why the work hasn't been done?
I got in touch with them very late, like right before the agenda went out, and so I didn't have
Okay.
a lot of time to follow up with them either.
Okay, I just wanted to see if there was any particular reason that might mean it would be delayed even further or anything like that.
And they're only allowed this one extension, correct? This is their
Correct.
last chance, okay.
Yes, so basically, providing them the one-year extension gives them one more year to do the work. If they don't complete it, it is an incomplete grant application, and they would have to come in as a new project if they wanted to request funding. And your guidelines say that you don't have to give anyone who has had a past failed grant funding in the future, so we always make people aware of that. But sometimes property owners change or other things have happened, so it is at your discretion as well.
So what happens to the money if they don't do anything?
It just goes back to the BBB funding, and it's reallocated the next year.
This is like Sarah said, this is a smaller grant. It's only for $5,000 too. Commissioner Westheimer? Any other questions or comments on this item? Do we have a motion?
I will move to extend the grant for the South San Francisco property for one more year, hoping that they understand that they need to get it done in that year.
Does that work, Sarah? Okay, just making sure it wasn't directly read off your requested action. We have a motion to approve the one-year extension for 416 South San Francisco Street. Do we have a second?
I'll second that motion.
And a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Oh, wait, Commissioner Westheimer?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, and that passes. All right, we will now move on to our general business items, where I believe we have a couple of presentations. So exciting. The first off, item 7A is the Downtown Mile Consultation Update.
I wonder if I could request we invert the order a little bit, because we do have a staff person who is, I'll stay for the whole meeting, but there's a staff person who could do their presentation and go home to their families if we moved up item 7C.
All right, we'll skip the Downtown Mile for a minute, and we will move on to item 7C, the upcoming zoning code amendments from new legislation.
Thank you so much. I apologize, I lost my pep at about 10:30 this morning. Second commission meeting of the day. All right, so I am here to talk about some new legislation that has been signed into law by the governor that will have impacts to city code as well as the zoning code. All of this information is posted on the City of Flagstaff website, and if you want to see copies of the bills, they are also posted on our website, as well as some initial drafts. So there were 4 bills specifically that are going to require code changes. The first up is Senate Bill 1162, and I'll go into these a little bit more in depth as we go through this presentation. This will impact the timeframes in which zoning map amendment applications are reviewed. There is also some data and mandatory reporting, but that is not necessarily part of amending the code. But we are required to amend the code by January 1st, 2025 in regards to our zoning map amendment process, and I'll walk you through that. House Bill 2720 also has a January 1st deadline, and it is in regards to standards for development of accessory dwelling units and certain requirements it mandates us to allow or expand their construction of. House Bill 2325 forbids municipalities from prohibiting single-family detached homes to keep up to 6 fowl in their backyards. We currently allow 5, so it's a very small change we have to make to 6. And House Bill 2721, which has a deadline of January 1st, 2026, so we have a full year to work on this one. Basically, it requires us to allow the construction of duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, and townhomes on all lots zoned for single-family residential use. So let's go through these. The required amendments will include modifications to Flagstaff City Code, Chapter 10. This first one is the Senate Bill 1162, which are our zoning map amendment timeframes. This amendment is already drafted and is posted on our website. A schedule for this has already been set up. We plan to go to Planning and Zoning Commission in September and City Council in October. Basically, the recently adopted legislation requires municipalities to adopt an amendment to their zoning ordinance that requires a zoning application to be administratively complete. So we do 2 different reviews on applications. Administratively complete is when you've hit all of the check marks on the application. So they have 30 days. Currently, we have 30 days to process it. Currently, I think we allow for 26. So this actually gives us 4 extra days. And then after receiving, we have to approve or deny the application within 180 days. This is what's tricky. 180 days from the day we determine the application is complete is 6 months. To approve or deny requires that rezoning go to council, as only council can approve a rezoning case. It takes 3 months at a minimum to go through the public hearing process. Just to the time frame for preparing staff reports, that leaves staff 3 months to review a zoning map amendment, and that's regardless if it's as large as 1,500 acres or as small as 2. So this will be a tricky one for staff. You know, we might actually be denying more applications administratively. We might be approving more, who knows? But it's definitely going to be an interesting case. The reason why you're seeing all of this legislation is because of the pressures and burdens in regards to the cost of housing. So cost of housing has always been tough in Flagstaff, but the rest of the state is now facing sort of the aspect of housing stock that's less affordable. And so you're going to see more and more push towards the legislature mandating more changes to the zoning code to increase housing stock and supply. Accessory dwelling units. This is also an amendment that is currently posted on, the draft is posted on our website, and again, following the same timeframe. So Planning and Zoning Commission in September, City Council in October. We need to get this done by January 1st. If we do not, ADUs are allowed on all lots and parcels without any limitations. It's important to note that there were no exceptions granted for historic districts as part of this legislation. So whatever applies in this legislation will apply to all properties, and it will mean some substantial changes, mostly for the town site district. So the requirements of this new legislation include the following. We must allow at least one attached and one detached accessory dwelling unit. The legislation is not clear about what attached means. So to us, that can be internal or just simply attached via a roof, via whatever is going to physically be attached. They do not adequately define attached. So that means 2 ADUs on any size residential single-family parcel. It is possible to have one additional accessory dwelling unit on a lot or parcel greater than 1 acre when the unit is restricted as an affordable housing dwelling. So that means if you're in the rural residential zone, that's liable not to affect the historic districts. There is the potential of having 3 accessory dwelling units on 1 lot. Currently, the zoning code only allows 1. We must allow an accessory dwelling unit that is 75% of the gross floor area of the single-family dwelling, or 1,000 square feet, whichever is less. Most people will hit the 1,000 square feet. Not everybody, but most. So really only the smaller homes would be limited in size, when you're under 1,250, 1,300 square feet. Municipalities may not prohibit the long-term lease of all of the units. We currently allow this now as an incentive to get away from people short-term renting ADUs. So the key here is that we can't prohibit long-term leases of both or any of all of the units. Municipalities may not require a familial, marital, employment, or other pre-existing relationship between the owner or occupant of a single-family home and the occupant of the ADU. We do not do that now. There are some municipalities that do. It's the mother-in-law's quarters kind of a thing, so it's fine to have that accessory dwelling unit so long as it's occupied by an extension of the existing family. Municipalities may not require that a lot or parcel have additional parking to accommodate an ADU or require fees for additional parking. We currently only require 1 parking space for an ADU. Of course, if we had added 2 ADUs, then it would have been 2 parking spaces, but we will not be able to require a parking space for that unit. Municipalities may not require that an ADU match the exterior design, roof pitch, or finishing materials of the single-family dwelling located on the same lot or parcel. The zoning code doesn't really include these provisions, although we have the zoning code does currently include these provisions. We have some standards already written generally throughout, and of course there's your additional overlay standards as well. So those will no longer be able to apply. Oh, and then we may not set restrictions for ADUs that are more restrictive than those for single-family dwellings in the same district with regard to height, setbacks, lot size, or coverage, or building frontage. We currently have a height limitation on accessory dwelling units when they use reduced setbacks. So most accessory dwelling units, when they're detached, if you're attached to the house, you already have to meet the primary. If you're detached, we allow reduced setbacks of 5 and 5, 5 for interior side, 5 for rear, so long as you didn't exceed 16 feet in height. We can no longer do that. We need to allow accessory dwelling units that match the underlying height of the zone. We also, I don't have it here, but we also have to continue to allow the 5-foot setback. It's written into the statute. Municipalities may not require improvements to public streets as a condition of allowing an ADU, except as necessary to reconstruct or repair a public street that is disturbed as a result of the construction of the ADU. We don't do this now. We just, if you have to repair the street for a sewer line, yeah, that's it, but we don't require public improvements for an accessory dwelling unit. Municipalities may not require a restrictive covenant concerning an ADU, and we do currently require a covenant, so that will be removed. I will tell you that there are some built-in limitations on short-term rentals. It's not the best legislation ever written, because we already had some limitations written in on short-term rentals. We're gonna say that we're grandfathered in terms of this legislation, and that we're gonna move forward with keeping those same limitations in regards to short-term rentaling. So basically, if you short-term rental an accessory dwelling unit, then the owner needs to live on site. That's the long and the short of it. So that's some good news. House Bill 2721. This is the missing, I call it missing middle housing. That's what they sort of refer it to. This is on or before January 1st, 2026 is when we need to have this done. Again, we qualify as over 75,000. We must authorize by ordinance and incorporate into its development regulations the allowance of duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, and townhomes as permitted use on both of the following. All lots zoned for single-family residential use within 1 mile of the municipality's central business district. We don't have a CBD defined really anywhere. We do have a zoning district called central business, but we don't in either the regional plan or anywhere define what that central business district is. I would tell you that the zoning district is rather small. It applies mostly to your downtown overlay. That probably wouldn't be sufficient for meeting the definition in this legislation of the central business district. This also has to apply to at least 20% of any new development of more than 10 contiguous acres. So when you do a mile distance from what's likely to become our CBD, that's going to impact some of the more historic neighborhoods. And the district that most likely is going to be impacted is the R1N or R1 neighborhood zone, which currently has a higher density allowance affiliated with it, but currently does not allow for multifamily housing. So there, in that zoning district, we would need to allow up to a fourplex. Again, there are no exceptions for historic districts in this legislation. The 20% of any new development of more than 10 contiguous acres, we're all scratching our heads on how to implement all of this. The reason is because our zoning districts apply throughout the city. We have those zoning districts set, and they have to be applied uniformly per state law across all zoning districts. So I can't say within just this 1 mile, your zone gets to act like this. If we were to stay within these parameters, we would likely have to create overlay districts. We would likely have to rezone properties, and it would be pretty difficult to get accomplished within the year deadline. Again, if we don't do it within that year, it's allowed anyway. What you're likely going to see is staff coming through with a proposal that this apply to all lots in all parts of the city. This would be more of an equity issue, and this would be following lines of equity. When you saddle one particular zoning district or one particular neighborhood with an increase in allowances and density, you encourage redevelopment, you encourage reinvestment, you also encourage gentrification. Balancing this across a lot of different neighborhoods is probably going to be the best bet. And so likely that's where we're going to see that amendment come. Of course, staff has not drafted an amendment at this point in time, but given the outcomes of of current projects and processes. We're in the middle of having our zoning code audited for affordable housing. What right now is impacting the development of housing units and affordable housing, as well as carbon neutrality. And so it's kind of really clear what's coming across in this. This missing middle, I know, is modeled after legislation that just passed in Oregon as well. This is much more common. You're seeing this in multiple states across the country. I would point out that the municipality may not discourage the development of missing middle through requirements or actions that individually or cumulatively make impractical the permitting, siting, or construction of middle housing. It's pretty broad. We cannot restrict middle housing types to less than 2 floors. We cannot restrict middle housing types to a floor area ratio of less than 50%. We don't use floor area ratio for residential units. We use lot coverage. It's a different calculation. We can't set restrictions, permitting, or review processes for middle housing that are more restrictive than those for single-family dwellings within the same zone. So this means we won't be doing concept or site plan reviews on these projects. They will go straight to building permit. We cannot require owner occupancy of any of the structures on the lot. We don't really do that now. Require any structures to comply with a commercial building code or to contain a fire sprinkler. And we cannot require more than 1 off-street parking space per unit. So this will also impact the high occupancy housing code standards as well. This section does not prohibit the governing body of the municipality from allowing any of the following single-family dwellings in areas zoned for single-family dwellings and additional types of missing middle not required under this section. What I would tell you is that in most of our zoning categories now, we allow for multifamily residential. The only one that doesn't is R1N. But even the RR, the rural residential, the estate residential zone, single-family residential zone, medium density residential, and high density, they all allow for multifamily development. They, however, limit it to a form that's no larger than a duplex. You can still have 4 units if your density allows for 4 units, but those would have to be in the form of either 4 individual units or 2 duplexes. So it wouldn't allow specifically a 4-plex. So that's how we allow multifamily is currently as we keep it sort of in scale with the single-family existing development. What I would tell you too is that right now density doesn't change. So just because a 4-plex unit is allowed in a particular zoning category or would be allowed in a zoning category, it doesn't necessarily change the allowed density. The R1N district is the one zone that doesn't allow for multifamily, but it has a higher density allowance. So most of the it's been this really sort of frustrating thing over time for staff because the density allowances are much higher. They're actually more equivalent to medium density residential, but we frequently have to tell property owners that they can't have those units because they're not allowed to have multifamily. Multifamily is defined as 3 or more units on a property. So they're just fundamentally not allowed. So it's one of the things, right? Like, well, here, there's a lot of density allowed, but actually you can't use it. So that kind of thing. So this one will be up and coming. I'm sure we'll have lots of conversation. There is wiggle room here. We could minimize it and focus it on certain neighborhoods, but I think overall carrying this throughout the city will reduce equity concerns of pinning this density on any one particular neighborhood in Flagstaff. So basically, everybody carries the burden, whether you're an older neighborhood or you're a newer neighborhood. And I don't mean it as a burden. I don't think that density is a burden in any way, shape, or form. It's actually something we need. And it's what we need to address the housing crisis. And again, we're going to continue to see this kind of legislation until the housing market sees some type of reprieve. We all got to watch these evolve over time. We also got to see bills that did not come to fruition. So, from what happened last year to what happened this year, I think we're just going to keep going along that path of seeing the legislature heavily involved in moving zoning codes along. I will tell you, for this legislation, doesn't apply to a lot of things. It doesn't apply to unincorporated areas. We don't have to apply it to areas that lack urban services, which is nice. Areas not served by water and sewer, which clearly that's appropriate to not add density in those areas. Areas that aren't zoned for residential use, but most of our commercial zones already allow multifamily development as well. Areas that are incorporated and are zoned for interim conditions, we don't have anything like that. This area under Title 48 and 6 is county improvement districts. Any land within the territory of vicinity of an airport, we already have our airport standards, and we have an airport overlay, so all of those properties are already accounted for. And then that's it. Sorry, I lost my pep.
Questions for Tiffany? I have a quick question. When you mention that there aren't exceptions for historic districts, does it specifically say in the legislations there are no exceptions for historic districts, or did they just completely not think about historic districts and just exclude mentioning them?
When they drafted, the initial drafts included some exceptions for historic districts, and they were removed.
Oh, so they just hate historic districts.
I don't think it's I don't think it's that they hate historic districts. I think there's an equity issue, and that they're looking at all areas within cities to be able to add density and see housing stock increase.
No, I get that, but you have like a giant fourplex in your historic district that doesn't match, and you're next to a giant ADU that doesn't match, and it's like, is this a historic district anymore? But
I don't know how SHPO would handle any of those things or look at your historic structures.
Yeah.
So I don't know if your neighbor builds something, if it diminishes your historic designation through SHPO.
Commissioner Westheimer?
My understanding from someone with the city is that when they wrote this, they weren't aware of Flagstaff's historic areas with very small lots. They were thinking of the big cities where there are historic houses on big lots, and they felt that people weren't willing to make any changes. And so we are getting sucked in and not considered at all.
Yeah, I imagine it's hard to make giant statewide legislation that accounts for all the variability. Sarah?
I think that is misinformation, because I remember there was a point at which we were talking to our lobbyist and others and Mark, and I provided comments, and part of the reason this applied to cities over 75,000 was because they wanted to include Flagstaff. So while they may not have been aware of the particulars, I think they particularly included us because of our housing affordability issues. Like I said, it's, and Tiffany said it, there were, the first draft or second draft of this had an exemption for historic districts. And I think not only what Tiffany said is true, but also they may have been concerned people would rush to implement new overlays to stop it from being implemented. And so they were conscientious of many of these things, maybe not all of the particulars, but it was certainly intended to apply to us in our central city, not just bigger ones.
So I actually heard that from someone who is the governor's advisor. So really close to the governor, someone told me that. But I don't know that those people know anything about our historic areas. I think that they're concerned about Flagstaff's issue, sure, but they don't really know the impact of what their decision is.
Commissioner Hayes has her hand up.
Oh, yes, thank you. Commissioner Hayes.
I was just going to say, I know that the SHPO provided comments on this, and that's pretty much all they could do, the Arizona SHPO, that this is sort of, it's not just Arizona, this is happening in a lot of places. And there has been some recent advisory council webinars about housing as well. I don't know what the outcomes of those were, but basically allowing things that haven't been allowed before in historic districts.
Thank you for that additional context.
So I'm curious about R1N allows duplexes. And so it's not a single-family zone per se. It allows single-family houses, but it's not a single-family zone. That's what they tried to do in the 1980s.
I would tell you that none of our zones are single-family zones, even though they have the misnomer of being called single-family. Because multifamily is allowed in all of those zones,
So
except R1N.
when we have these small lots, because gentrification is going to be a big issue, but when we have these small lots in our historic areas on the east side and the west side, you mentioned setbacks of 5 feet. That's what they will be now, no matter what? And necessarily not enough parking for winter snow problems?
So the setback for accessory dwelling units will be 5 feet on the rear and on the interior side, which is what they are now, but the height limitation is 16 feet. The height will go up to 35 in most zones. So whatever the underlying is of the zone, so it's only HR that has a higher height than 35. So yes, people can build 2-story accessory dwelling units.
Tiffany, does that mean that the townsite overlay, which allows a 25-foot single-family home, will have to also allow a 25-foot ADU?
Yeah, not 35, it would be the 20, it's the same as the single family. So whatever you allow for the primary, you have to allow for the accessory dwelling unit. The text amendment, again, has been drafted. It does include that amendment in the zoning code, because there's one section in the zoning code on the town site overlay that has the height limitations for single family, and it has a height limitation for an accessory dwelling unit, or for accessory structure. Added in is now accessory dwelling unit, and it's the same as the principal, so it's 25 feet.
I forgot to say that I'm sorry that you have to deal with this, especially with deadlines, because this must really be awful to have to redo everything in your zoning code that you've already worked out. So if I were in your shoes, I'd be like head exploding because you have other things to do as well.
Actually, this is my primary job, and I'm happy to do it, and I'm actually kind of glad we're making headway towards affordable housing. It's been really hard to make changes, and I think it's really important that Flagstaff continues to grow, and I think missing middle and accessory dwelling units are one of the best ways we can do that without seeing the larger sort of projects that we had a lot of backlash on in previously. I think that this is the right way to go. I think the folks living in a dwelling unit, the number of people living in a dwelling unit has decreased over time in Flagstaff. So we have far less people per dwelling unit than the average. And because of that, we have an abundance of infrastructure in existing neighborhoods, places where it's cheaper and easier to build new stock.
But we don't have affordability controls, so there's no guarantee that anything will be affordable.
There's never a guarantee ever, but there's always the idea that additional housing stock will help to offset.
I had a question about, it doesn't have to do anything to do with the historical aspect of some of this zoning, but the parking. So there would be, how is that going to work in regards to like winter? You're not supposed to have vehicles on the street. Is that going to change that policy, or?
So it's not really a policy, it's actually an ordinance currently. And right now for the winter parking ordinance, we prohibit parking on street between the hours of midnight and 6 a.m. So you can park during the day and on the street. Do we probably need to have a conversation about it? Yes. Do a lot of communities with snow allow on-street parking all the time? Yes. Lots of cities that don't have lots of parking. I mean, we know lots of cities, lots of urban areas, they park on the street even in snow events. So yeah, it'll be a council decision on what they decide to do.
as long as I've lived here, and you probably remember this, they used to plow at the curb to the center, which really the parking would not have allowed them to do that. And so it might date back to that they didn't allow parking overnight.
All right, any other questions for Tiffany?
Could you come back again and speak specifically? There was a lot of information to absorb.
Sure.
And speak more specifically to the zoning and the impacts on our historic districts, not just the whole city, because they're actually going to get hit harder, in my estimation, than anywhere else in town, especially because we can't control the short-term rentals.
Okay. I'm not, sorry.
I was just going to ask for clarification on what you're asking staff to specifically discuss as far as the impact. Like specifically, what kind of impact are you looking for us to give you feedback on?
Well, the purpose of our commission is to preserve irreplaceable history of our community, and this is going to potentially have a huge impact. And there was a ton of information to try and absorb, and it would just be nice to be really clear on it. Be really clear.
So kind of understanding what are the changes from what are kind of regulated over the overlay. I just want to make sure we have a big workload. And I just want to make sure that staff is getting you exactly what you're looking for, and so that they have clear direction. So are you looking for kind of what's the change and kind of like what the height difference is? I mean, it's an economic impact. I'm just trying to understand. I understand what the mission of the commission is. I just want to make sure we understand what we're being asked to provide you.
Would it be helpful maybe if someone was able to come back after this language has been incorporated into the Flagstaff zoning code in January and let us know how that has worked?
Well, I kind of think we should know where it's moving so that if we want to talk to council before they approve changes, or we come up with ideas that would allow us to preserve our history, which is what we're here to do, that we could come up with ideas or talk to council about the impacts in case they hadn't thought about it.
Yeah, I mean, part of this process, I'm not doing a lot of public outreach because the code updates are mandated. So because of that, I didn't want to go out and sort of run people through a process where I say, great, but the state has mandated these changes. And so I think you're going to hear that a lot. The state has mandated these changes. What I would tell you, though, is that, you know, if you're really interested and you want to protect your neighborhood, you can have CCNRs. And CCNRs regulate things separately, right? You can have private land use regulations. You have to get all of the people involved. Like, you have to get all of those people to commit to agree to be involved, right? You can't forcibly, and it's not even a zoning code thing where it's 50%, right? Like, you know, 50% of the people can sign into a landmark overlay. It's not that. So, I mean, you can work on, and there are historic districts that I'm aware of in Phoenix that have actually developed CCNRs to prohibit short-term rentals. You have all of those same abilities.
But a CCNR wouldn't be able to say you can't have an ADU
Sure it
or a
can.
fourplex?
Absolutely.
So historic district legislation, which is government legislation, will be superseded by this legislation, but a bunch of homeowners getting together and saying your house has to be white can go against the government law? That seems
It's not-
backwards.
It's not go against. It's you want to have controls in excess of, right? So you can't, through CCNRs, say, I'm going to give you a 3-foot setback when it's a 5-foot setback, right? Because the city would still need to enforce the 5-foot setback. But CCNRs can enforce stricter requirements, and they do. I think that's honestly why you didn't see the bigger pushback on these bills from the valleys, is because the valleys are massive subdivisions. They all have CCNRs, and Flagstaff does not. They also hit at 75,000. That leaves out places like Fountain Hills. Well, I mean, if you think of Fountain Hills, I mean, they didn't really want to be included in these. I mean, so the city, I mean, every city has a lobbyist, they all participate. You know, I'm just trying to tell you what there is that you can do. A zoning code is not the only regulatory document for land use. If you want to put all of your standards in the zoning code and you want to rely on the city is subject to state law. But can private property owners go and enforce their own standards? They absolutely can. You all have to agree.
100%, or, I mean, when
Right.
we passed the
So that's-
overlay, it was 78% support, which is
Right.
pretty darn high twice.
That's written in the code. So
I
it's
get
not-
that, but I guess I'm saying,
Yes,
would you
a
have to have
property-
100%?
Yes,
or
every property owner would need to agree to be included in those deed restrictions at this point. So you're either the master developer and you apply those deed restrictions and then you buy in, or yeah, you all agree. You're not gonna be able to go and enforce your private standards on somebody else's property without their authority and permission.
And I just want to clarify that, and I think everybody knows that code covenants and restrictions, CCNRs, are a private civil issue and that they're not city, and so we wouldn't be enforcing it. So I just want to clarify that because you referred to, I think, the overlay standards for the 75%. This would not follow any of zoning code or any other city charter for regulation. It's a separate civil matter that homeowners would do as a private deal and would be privately enforced. We would not, code enforcement will not enforce or otherwise act on things that are out of compliance with a CCNR, only if it's not in compliance with zoning code. I just want that to be clear for everybody.
Right, you would have to use the court systems in order to enforce your CCNRs.
So an area like Fountain Hills has an actual boundary, I imagine, because they were a development?
Well, Fountain Hills just removed themselves because they're under 75,000.
But that's what I'm saying. They are a development with a boundary. But when we have historic neighborhoods, not necessarily in Flagstaff, but historic neighborhoods were developed differently. And so what would need to be done about boundaries? And
I think you're conflating the two issues. You know, the legislation applies to municipalities over 75,000. So that's just one. So there are some municipalities who definitely push for the 75,000 to not be included in that. But then if you want to go work on CCNRs, you'd have to go figure that out yourself in terms of what properties would want to be in that and who's willing. And then you all have to agree to what those regulations are, and then you have to privately enforce them.
so what happens to Flagstaff's landmark district? Does that just disappear too?
No, none of the districts disappear, and the standards still remain in place for, a lot of the things that you already review. Just accessory dwelling units need to be allowed to be 25 feet high at this point.
That's the kind of information I think that would be helpful for us so that we totally understand what comes before us.
Okay, so yeah, we can't require the building and material, we can't make it match the single-family home, essentially. And then the 25 feet. So, I mean,
And I'd just say that the National Park Service guidelines for units on the lot with an original historic district don't require it to match. They have compatibility requirements, and so all it says is we can't make it match. We can't say, Caitlin, your house is a white stucco house and you must make your ADU white stucco. We can't say, Caitlin, you have to use our current building height for ADUs of 16 feet. They both can be 25 feet. And so those are, the first round, I think, of changes are fairly small. I think the missing middle one is the one that's going to be more complicated, and of course, Tiffany has not got a draft of that yet. I can certainly make sure that the HPO, me acting, or whoever is in this position after me, conveys to you when those drafts become available and when they're scheduled for hearings. And that's probably the best we can do. When there is a more detailed impact that we actually understand in a lot more detail. I mean, planners are going to be learning this as a group. And, SHPO is probably going to offer some technical guidance. And as Alicia said, there's already been some webinars to help historic preservation professionals understand. So I think some of it was we just don't know yet. We're trying to all put our heads together and figure out what the best way to move forward is, and we're going to learn from each other. And there are going to be some things that were unintended consequences, I am sure, for something that's this broad. There's also another legislative session between this, the first round of these changes for ADUs and the second round for missing middle. And there may be enough, back and forth with legislators that they may consider some changes to this legislation by the time we're looking to implement it. So there's just a lot of unknowns. If they tweak this next year while Tiffany is in the middle of drafting something, we'll have to be responsive to that. And so it's just too early to give you more details other than in the town site overlay, we will not be able to have a lower height for ADUs. We will need to allow larger ADUs, and we will not be able to require them to have matching materials to the primary structure. And we will have to allow 2 ADUs, not just 1.
Commissioner Hayes has her hand up.
Yes, Commissioner Hayes.
So is it fair to say that these kind of discussions would be on the Planning and Zoning Commission as well? So if someone was wanting to call in and listen, they could learn some more. Are those also recorded?
Yes, our Planning and Zoning Commission meetings are recorded. I will be at the Planning and Zoning Commission on September 11th for a work session on the ADU amendment and the zoning code map amendment timeframes. So I will be going through those text amendments in detail, and then their public hearing is scheduled for September 25th, then goes to council the 1st and I believe the 15th. And then it would be in effect 30 days after. So our goal would be to get it done before January 5th, January 1st.
So I'm confused. I thought you said they were mandated, and the impression I got or something I heard made me think that council has nothing to say. They would just be informed, or what would be council's role?
Well, I guess council could choose to be in violation of state law, and that's a conversation for them and their attorney.
Well, Sarah, I definitely think the idea of keeping us apprised of when things like the September 11th workshop and things are coming up would be great. And then if there is any specifics about how this is being written in, or maybe we could just tackle one of these at a time. This was great, but as Steffi said, this is a lot of information, and given the proposal we had last month, it's clear that these questions are going to come up a lot faster than we might think. And so just knowing some of those ins and outs could be really useful for us. Like the fact is, like defining that was one of the questions we had last time, like what is a ADU? And so, like a 75% floor plan, that kind of stuff could be really helpful, so.
I think the 75% was in regards to the number of people that had to be in agreement to create a boundary.
No, it was on the ADU line. It was something about like
okay, I just wanted to make
75%
sure. Sorry.
floor size
Okay.
or something. Because that was one of the other questions we had about how,
75% of
Yeah.
currently for an ADU, it's just 800 square feet, so we just have a simple calculation,
Yeah.
it's just 800, but now it's a sliding scale based on the size of the house.
yeah.
So 75%. So it's 75% of that.
You can have one tiny little room in your backyard.
In those cases, it'll be more restrictive.
Okay.
But
All
you
right.
can have two.
Any last questions or comments on this one? All right, we will now go back to 7A and be so excited to learn about the downtown mile.
Thank you, Tiffany.
Oh, yes, thank you. And thank you again, Tiffany and Sarah, for being our champions to the state on questions of zoning and how it relates to Flagstaff.
So the consultant that we have for the Downtown Mile Section 106 consultation wanted us to share a memo with you that they have sent to SHPO for concurrence. So do not have concurrence yet. We're in the 30. We're waiting for SHPO to review and start the 35 days for government agencies to like look at it. So I basically get a chance as the acting HPO to look at this again as a Section 106 review, even though Mark and now I have been reviewing it all along the way. We're still a consulting party, so we'll get it back sometime soon. But they have, to complete the downtown mile and to get a third rail and to handle widening the opportunities so we don't have such a bottleneck on Milton under the bridge has to go. And it is an older bridge. It's actually the second bridge. So the documentation they provided you was on the history of the bridge and the inventory form. And they are looking at two forms of mitigation. One, they're looking to create some interpretive panels about the history of the bridge and how critical it is in Flagstaff. And then also possible other inclusion of art or other things, which SHPO is not going to necessarily consult on the content of that. That will be the HPO and maybe the commission getting presentations in the future when we're closer to having design details on that. But at this point, that's what they have offered to SHPO as mitigation for replacing the bridge with a wider bridge that's both wider in terms of it would allow more lanes to pass under the railroad and it would allow more rail lines to move east to west through town.
So I knew they were bringing in a third rail, but I did not know they were widening the number of lanes under the bridge. Which direction is that going? Because there's a building there.
The Milton Road Corridor Study, which is an ADOT publication and is on their website, has a widening plan for how wide they would like Milton to be at that location. And it doesn't impact any existing buildings, except for maybe the one at the corner. But also that's not gonna happen initially with the bridge construction. So the one that's like the little design center, I think might be the only one that's impacted. And the Downtown Connection Center, which is the one under construction right now, was aware of those widening plans and knew where that line was when they put in their plans and construction. They're also like relocating the pump house that you see sitting there next to the bridge. There's a lot of design details on that are pending the full FRA consultation with SHPO on the whole design of that area. But this is just the initial one for demolishing the existing bridge.
So, okay, you said the design center, but then there's the old I Do, which has that's really good history here. That's in line with the design center. Does that mean that has to go?
I don't think so. I think that it mostly is pushing into the Colton Park area. That's part of why they widened the bridge in front of City Hall. Remember, and it's kind of got that bizarre, I call it like the four-wheel drive, or the large truck parking looks like, but really that's a future lane. So, but there is information on that in the Milton Road Corridor Study. And that, of course, all will go through consultation as well as those project plans come forward. But first, the bridge widening and the rest of the downtown mile. I don't know that there's any funding or that it's even in the ADOT capital plan when they will look at Milton widening. The bridge is the first key step to widen Milton, which is needed. I think anybody who passes under Milton there every day sees that it's a bottleneck. How wide and where it will go will be to be determined, I think.
So I know that the Greaves is going to turn into a T intersection, no longer a slip lane. Mm-hmm. Will there be a pedestrian walkway anymore? There are the stairs, and then years later, not too many years ago, they added the ramp, which a lot of people prefer to the steps, whatever. I think it's for ADA that they put the ramp in. Will all of that stay? Because it's an important part of our transportation link to north of the tracks to south of the tracks, and it always has been. That's super important for north and south to interact.
ADOT usually follows the local standards for curb and sidewalk and things that are above the curb, essentially, is how the engineers would say it. And we would require an arterial have sidewalks on both sides. But I don't have any, there's no design work for that, so we can't answer any detailed questions about it at this time. It wouldn't make sense from a pedestrian circulation standpoint to only have a sidewalk on the east side of Milton, because you cannot cross at Humphreys to get over to the north side. There will be an underpass, though, that will go underneath Milton for pedestrians from the transit center to City Hall. So there'll be some improvements. I just don't know what the surface improvements along Milton will be. I know we would require, and of course advocate for sidewalks on both sides, because that's what we would require on any arterial.
Yeah, this memo specifically just deals with the historic retaining wall, correct? And other things may be coming to us in the future.
Correct.
Okay.
It'll be a little bit piecemeal, but Christine Cameron, who's the engineer working on this, and now me taking over in terms of doing the 106 reviews and sitting in on the environmental compliance calls, is Mark has been doing this for years and keeping track of it and keeping in track of how all these projects intersect. But they just wanted to share this one with you because the bringing forward of potential future interpretation might be something that comes before you in the future. And then I'll inform you when we've gotten a 106 review sent to us and if we've provided concurrence or not.
Because I assume they'll be just demolishing that wall.
Yes, the wall and the bridge will get replaced.
Okay. Commissioner Westheimer?
Oh, I was just going to say for people's information, the Malpai along there, the wall, is new. That was done after 1988. That's not mentioned in here. I think also that railing on the left side is all new, and the railing above is all.
Not part of the story.
Not historic.
I believe Mark did tell them the Malpai was not an original material, that it's stuck to the original material.
But what's missing is the importance of that connector between south side and north side, because people had to get to the mill, people had to get down to the other areas, and that was really critical, and still is for the people who live on the west side, because we have no other way unless we go to Beaver and San Francisco to get across. So when I read this, I was like, well, there, it said the criteria A, B, and C, but it didn't really talk about the community importance of that underpass. And I think that's really important.
But that's not part of the scope of the document necessarily for concurrence, I think. And that's because it's the bigger downtown mile that addresses a lot of those things. Like, we are getting new grade separated crossings both at City Hall and the Connection Center and Florence and Walnut. The design of the actual road underneath falls under a whole different project that will come from federal highways and have a separate consultation process. This is just the nature of these complex construction things, is they get done in pieces, and Mary Ellen Walsh has to keep track of them and coordinate with us. And so they're just wanting to make sure that you're advised of where they are. They're working on a Class 3 cultural resource study for other parts of this right now. So I think you'll see more coming, but it is going to kind of reveal and slowly, not murder mystery style, but sort of Clue style, because there's not design work on all of the pieces, or the impact area is not always determined. The depth of construction is getting clearer, but there's iterative rounds, and consultation tends to happen informally, and this is the first kind of formal consultation because it's clear and they know they have to do it, and so they're doing the more formal step. But we've been talking about this for at least 2 years, especially the bridge in question.
I mean, I think I hear what you're saying, but significance criteria A, historic events and trends, I think should include the importance of linking the south side and the north side of Flagstaff. That's it couldn't have been done without the retaining wall. That was necessary to put in steps so people could pass under the tracks there. Like, really critical for this community getting along. All the kids on the south side, after they went to South Beaver or Dunbar, everyone went to Flag High, everybody. So they had to get across the tracks. So we had La Plaza Vieja, and they needed to get across. So it was really important, and I just feel like that's missing from the historic events and trends.
Oh, I think that would be something more in line with like the interpretive panels that Sarah is mentioning, rather than just a memo of concurrence to the SHPO with further Section 106 stuff to follow, if that makes sense. Like, that's just outside the scope of this one specific memo that we are discussing here, but it would be part of a larger scope of other parts of this project.
Yeah, I can certainly take that feedback to Ted Roberts, who's the historic professional working on this, historic preservation professional working on this, and find out what he has in terms of those kinds of materials for the interpretive panels. That is a little further down the line, but it will be something we will get a chance to look at. So, yeah, he wanted to keep you apprised. I'm happy to take our comments back to him at the next meeting for the team. And we'll keep providing you what's happening, at least at enough detail, even though it kind of moves at a snail pace. 106 consultation, I think, what did Mark say? It can gum you to death. It's just one little thing at a time. And so I'll try and make sure that I can neatly tell you the story of where we are and what's coming and why we're paying attention to this and why it's important, even if the level of detail at each one might be a little varied.
I appreciate all that, but I really think that if they're going to talk about significance, they need to talk about the importance of north side, south side. And that could be under person. I mean, there may not be a single person I can think of who walked under the bridge every day to get to Flag High or to get downtown. But that importance for this community being what was a very diverse place early on, that underpass is really important, and maybe that person who wrote this doesn't live here, doesn't understand these details, but I think that if the significance is going to be discussed, that needs to be included.
I will get a chance to provide SHPO comments when they send it to me, which is funny because it's our consultant preparing it, but there will be another review.
Commissioner Hayes?
I was just going to say, I think what Duffy's saying is the circulation patterns of that landscape in the Park Service when we do cultural landscapes, which we usually do before we do a nomination, is we look at circulation. And I think that's what you're talking about, people accessing one part of the city to get to another part of the city.
Yes, and that it was about how this community got along as one place because they could get from one part to the other. The Hispanic community mostly and African American on the south side, getting to the north at that time. It's really important to how this community functioned.
All right, any other comments or questions on this item? All right, we look forward to seeing this coming back to us in the future. All right, we will now move on to our next item, the fiscal year 2024 Historic Facade and Signs Grant Funding Overview.
Yes, so with Mark's departure and Craig Zanetko, who's been doing a lot of our accounting and receipt work for grants, has moved on to a new position, and he's onboarding a new employee, Aliciana, to take over his role in helping get the payments out for the grants. We're in a time of transition again. And so we did a recheck, of course, on what's going on with grants, where are we, how many are outstanding. And one of the interesting things is for the last 3 years, at least since I've been involved in the program, when we obligated the money for a grant by giving it to them, Craig would obligate it into the system, and then the budget team would roll over the money if they hadn't been paid by the end of the fiscal year. Like, we'd make that request with the carry forwards. For some reason this year, and maybe it's some pattern, it's probably an accounting thing that I don't even fully understand, they decided not to do that. They're not going to roll over our money, and I don't know that they won't do it next year. We don't request carry forward until March usually, and so next February, it will be on the list of things to do, is to sit down with the budget team early and talk about why and get you better information on what's going to happen. Can we count on carry forward in future years, or do we have to start kind of tracking and thinking about these differently? Because Other grant processes, like the beautification grants, have gone to having like a twice-a-year process so that they aren't running into the problem we have. But our grants, that doesn't make sense because we're trying to time them with people's construction needs, which can happen anytime during the year. So we may have to regroup a little bit in February when I can have, they won't have budget instructions for us on carry forward until around then. And so with that, we do have our budget request of $160,000, but some of it is still tied to grants that we obligated last fiscal year. So I tried to give you a quick rundown of those with as much information as I have right now, or had at the time that I published it. The Reardon Action Network is not going to be able to complete their grant. They have run out of time and extensions. I think that's one of the reasons that in the past it was like a hard no for working with other government agencies. They just never had the match allocated to the state park. And so that's just a lesson learned. We wanted to try, and they may still do the work in the future, but I've already let Nikki Lober, the park ranger, know that that's not money she can count on going forward, and she said that she understood. We have the Deschambre Guy property at Sunset Drive, which you've just done the extension for, and the Valdivia property on San Francisco. Those are moving forward. We've paid out the Fire Creek Coffee, and they came in under last year. We paid them with last year money. And then Robert and Dorothy Best, who have the house on the other side of Wheeler Park, that's a very large roof restoration, and we'd given them level 2 funding. They are not going to have the full $20,000. They're going to have something less for their match. They think their total spending was more like $26,000. And so the match will only be around 11 or 13,000. They turned in receipts, but the receipts were incomplete and they needed to go back because we noticed some things were missing, and we noticed there was some missing labor costs, and we wanted to make sure they had all the receipts in rather than writing them a partial check. So that's also underway, but will come out of this fiscal year's money. We paid out the Collier Hoke property on Cherry Avenue last year. 601 Cherry and 614 West Santa Fe, which were approved by the commission in April, will need to be accounted for in 2025 money. And you've now given, I think there was a grant application in July, and then the one to the property on Birch tonight, and you'll definitely have another one next month that's already been turned in. So I will start preparing a monthly report for you, essentially, and I'm going to take out the ones from last fiscal year and just give you a where are we this fiscal year with status updates with all of these property owners. And I will start, once I have a person to help me, we will start making sure there is at least a quarterly check-in with all grantees. There is one grant on here that I did not put on here right now, which is the Yogurt Shop. And I realized that after I had sent it out to you. They had their extension given to them in March, and I believe they've lost their contractor. So I need to talk with them, and given the timing, they may not be successful at completing their grant, though. We'll see if we can get them some help to make it through that. Sometimes it's just that way. We can't do the work for people. We can only help them get their reimbursement. So I will keep this up to date for you. So you know how much do we have available, what could be our overage, and then in February and March when we have the carry forward request period, I'll try and get more clarity so that we know what we can expect. And if what we can expect is that we can't really be approving grants in April unless we're telling people your grant doesn't start until July 1st, that might be the way it goes. Usually people don't start doing their grant work the next day. So maybe this will be a year where we do some figuring out of what messaging, because what staff wants in all of these situations with the grant, both level 1 and level 2 funding questions and questions of when does your grant actually expire, or does it go into effect and you're eligible for your refund, is we want to give really consistent information. And some of these questions that have popped up in the last 6 months, personally, I don't feel like I can always give as clear and direct advice as I would like. But I'd like to keep us moving and working with property owners as much as humanly possible. And so, you want these grants to be supporting buildings in the community. And so that's the important part that we want to make sure you're working with them on. So we'll have some uncertainty this year. Hopefully by next year, it's all smoothed out.
This was a great breakdown. Thank you so much. It's nice to, we always see these grants and then a year later, we're like, what happened with that? So it's nice to, if you could include pictures if they're done, that would
it'd
be fun.
We could.
But also, I know you have a lot of other things to do.
Yeah, but I think having a running tally or at least a tracking sheet that we are working off of is essential, given that we clearly lost a little track of some of the information and that the budget scenario changed on us unexpectedly. So we will work to make that a successful part of the transition that staff is working on now.
And it's a nice proof of purchase to the community. This is what your, BBB funds are going for, and look at how we've improved these neighborhoods. And
Yes.
they're so pretty.
BBB funds will be back on the ballot, I think, Michelle, is it 2026 or 2025? I can't remember.
I think it's 2026.
Yeah, in a few years, there'll be a reauthorization request for BBB funding. And Economic Vitality has asked what kind of great stories we might have, or property owners who might want to talk up how great the grant was as part of making that information available.
Nice. Questions or comments on this item? All right. We will now move on to reports. We have one for 111 North Beaver Street. Any exciting things you want to tell us about this mural?
I actually am going to, do you want me to pass it to you? I didn't get to review this because it happened, it was a certificate of no effect during a time when I was out of the office and Mark was on leave. And so Elsa Erling, our associate planner, picked up this certificate of no effect and worked with Michelle McNulty on it. Do you want to talk about it, or you want me to just say what it was? There you go. Well, and that shows that that the team can work to fill the gap, but it's basically a mural on the side of a building that is not contributing to the downtown overlay, but is in the downtown overlay. This mural was not considered a sign, so it didn't go through any of the sign review pieces, and I think it's done. It's very pretty.
Flowers and computers, or are those windows? It's a very small photo. Okay, that makes much more sense.
I think it's the same. Is his name Joe, the artist? Because I think it's from what you sent out. It's the same style as Mama Bee's is now covered in flowers, which he does a beautiful job.
Yeah. There is something I did not put on reports that I'll report quickly as a miscellaneous item. We did have a Section 106 review quickly this month. And if I just say it verbally, then I won't offer it again. Federal Highways is looking at bringing the fiber optic line through the interstate corridor, and they sent their 106 work over and let us look at all the sites they had determined out of as site. And we actually did send them back a phase 3 cultural resource study that we completed with you as the commission in the east side of town that they had missed in their as site report, and sent that back to ADOT so that they know what the actual site density is in that area. So we were able to contribute very positively to that 106, even though we don't have a ton of archaeology here at HPC. Just wanted you to know it benefited another project.
Very cool. All right. Michelle, what other miscellaneous items do you have for us?
So we have, on the agenda, we have posted the position for the senior planner, comprehensive neighborhood planner, and historic preservation officer. That opened up Friday, so that's gonna run until filled. So if you have networks of people who could be interested, please forward the job description. We would appreciate it. Not on the agenda, but kind of hot off the presses, the acting attorney, so our attorney is on maternity leave, our attorney is on maternity leave, sorry, those words were too close together. And so the attorney acting in her place did pop in, and he is going to do the Prop 207 presentation that you've asked for next month. So we'll have that coming to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, any other miscellaneous items?
I might not be here for next meeting, just FYI. It'll be the third day of my new job, and they know about you, but we haven't totally figured it out yet, so just if that matters.
Congratulations.
And that sounded a little ominous that they know about us.
What is your new job?
I'll be the collection management supervisor at the public library just across the street.
Another thing to note is that the regional plan final meetings are next week, I believe. I'm going to the one on Thursday. I'm going to go this time. I forgot last time.
I'm glad you brought that up because the schedule has changed.
Oh no, what is it now?
It is
I put in my
Thursday. There's one on Thursday. So the one on the 27th of August was moved back to September 16th, I think. That sounds correct, yeah.
It's a Monday.
It is a Monday. It is a Monday this time, yeah. So they selected September 16th, and they will be having their meeting to go over the full document. The one on August 29th, they are going to be looking at changes to, we went through a full staff review. We haven't completed a legal review yet, but we went through a full staff review. I got another 500 exciting comments to integrate, which is part of what I'm spending every single day on right now. But it really was good because the people who are reviewing it were the people who we expect to actually implement the plan. And they found a lot of organizational issues that made it hard for them to read and understand what they should be doing with it. So at the meeting on the 29th, and we're sending the agenda out for that and posting the packet, if not tonight, then tomorrow, they will be looking at the overall organization of the document, changes to how implementation guidelines are worded and strategies, and also looking at a few other kind of cleanup items so that when we get together on the 16th, they have the full document to review. I expect to send them the full draft on September 3rd or 4th. That's my goal. And then it won't be in like an InDesign pretty format yet. It'll still be kind of a long Word document. But one of the things they'll talk about on the 29th is the design. We did have some choices on design and layout provided by our writer-editor consultant who's already been doing a bunch of technical reviews. It's so helpful to have someone else's eyes on it whose eyes are not already crossed. And so they will get a look at like the visual layout of the plan, and then by the time it goes out for a public review, it'll be pretty, not just the right information.
So maybe, I don't know if anyone else has been to other meetings, maybe in September or October after the, no, because you said they moved it to the 16th?
Yeah, it'll be.
Oh, that's going to be fun to walk home in.
Yeah. Please let us know if anyone needs a ride. The range is.
Yeah, so our meeting would be the 18th. Maybe on September 18th, we could have time in this meeting just to review any other meetings we've gone to, things we've gotten out of it.
Sure. Put that under general business. Great.
So Sarah, when the state comes up with changes, like they have, oh my gosh, it's really coming down. How does that affect your process with the regional plan?
We've known about that legislation. It was signed in May. So we've had, luckily that was a time when we were working on and writing the growth and land use chapter. So we were able to take it into account a little bit. I do think though the information Tiffany shared with you tonight is not yet widely understood. So it might be something that we're also rolling out so people understand that comments have to, the direction the plan needs to go needs to take those realities into account, that we're going to be allowing fourplexes in neighborhoods we haven't before, and some of this missing middle housing will need to be a bigger part of our future development discussions. So I hope we're thinking of ways to make that really productive, but it's definitely a concept we've incorporated into the portions of the plans that talk about neighborhoods.
Any other miscellaneous items?
Yes, I have a couple, if I may. So there's an article that people might be interested that's been published by Place Economics, August 2024, called the YIMBY Movement, and it's Place Economics has their perspective. They're an economics organization, obviously, about historic preservation's response to the Yes in My Backyard movement. So you can find it, I'm sure, on their website. I asked about sending out information to other commission members and was told that we can do that. There can be no message. You cannot reply to all. Just send it out to you all, that there's an article or something you might want to read. But you can't reply, and to do it BCC so that, I don't know, it protects whatever. So I think I got that right. Did I get that right, Sarah? But there are a lot of articles I come across that might interest you all, so I can send those. And then I also have a question for staff to explain something for me, please. So on the interdepartmental staff review of projects, 15 North Park was on the list. So what went to the IDS meeting when HPC has not given them a certificate of appropriateness? So what went?
So, as discussed last month, what they had brought to us was a concept plan. Concept plan is just that, it's kind of a high-level review, basically allowing staff, I call it kind of like a pre-application on steroids, where essentially they're kind of giving us a more detailed plan of what they are intending to build, and we make sure that they're meeting all the codes, but it's not a formal approval or anything like that. That specific project is required. Some things go from concept plan straight to building permit. Other things go concept plan to site plan and then to building permit. This specific application was required to go through a site plan review. And so when they came to you kind of in the middle, I think that's why there was a lot of questions that you all had that weren't answered, because we don't require a certain level of design at concept that we require at site plan. And so for you guys to give a thumbs up on something, it could be changed through that site plan review process if a lot of the members had comments. So what is in review now is the site plan. So that will go through the IDS, the interdivision staff, and then they'll have their comments, making sure that it's meeting code, working through anything that needs to be resolved, like if there's drainage issues or anything like that that isn't regulated by the overlay, and then they can come back and present to you what they have. It's a safer way to do it, because we've had issues in the past where people will come too early to HPC. They think they have an approval, and they don't. It's a part of the approval process, but there's another part of that approval process that could change. And that's why there was that condition of approval, that if there were significant changes to the IDS review, that it would have to come back here.
Yeah, I think it's our preference, and we even have a portion of the site plan application and the HP application that says, like, you may be asked to do one of these before the other. And 15 North Park, ones like that in the future, I think what we've learned is that they should submit a site plan first, and they should at least get one round of site plan review comments before you see it, because those could be pretty significant. They could be like, we're gonna put a building here, and Water Services could say, you can't do that unless you're gonna relocate the whole sewer, and you haven't shown us how you're gonna do that. So they could be redesigning through the site plan comments that they get in a way that could change their application. That's always kind of and you know, the HP approval does not exempt people from any of those other requirements. The only thing that the Heritage Preservation Commission can offer flexibility on is the architecture, but not all of the other development requirements that we have for buildings. So, yeah, that'll be, when I did review that this week, I'm interested tomorrow to hear what my colleagues have to say, and then we will confer on getting it back on your agenda.
If I may clarify something, the overlay does address yards, and what we've noticed is that yards are not being required. That's at the Haddon project. And so if you're saying we can only talk about architecture, yards are definitely part of the overlay. So I'm a little confused and concerned about that. Am I thinking so literally that you said architecture, but you mean everything, all the standards in the overlay?
Yes, but that's different because that's not like an exemption from a requirement, that is a requirement. And I have not yet found that I know that's something someone else said to me today over email, but I have not yet found where there are projects that there wasn't a staff review that calculated the interior yard space. I do think it hasn't always been included in the staff reports. And if that's something we're concerned about, obviously we can make sure future staff reports say exactly how big the yard is. But yes, people are cutting it pretty close. We've definitely seen 1,052 square foot yards, but that meets the threshold of 1,000 square feet. And it says contiguous and interior, and you can meet that in a number of ways that, I think we have seen some of that in the past. I don't know, and it's another question for Tiffany, maybe if that will hold up if we have to deal with 2 ADUs on a property. Like, we won't be able to use that to keep someone from building the ADUs that the state legislature has said they have to build. So it could be that that's diminished, but I don't know what that looks like yet. We haven't seen an example of it.
I think what's happening is that the calculations are including setbacks, and that's not how it's written. Absolutely, clearly not written that way. And people don't have to put in 2 ADUs, from what I was hearing. They can, they don't have to. I mean, those things cost a lot. Construction here is like $400 a square foot. So the chances, obviously, of them being affordable are slim at best. But people don't have to do 2 ADUs.
So let me say something about setbacks. Setbacks are for buildings and constructed things. I've looked at that. That is, again, something someone emailed me about recently. And I do not find that there is anywhere that says the setback cannot be part of the yard. And there is parts of the zoning code that make it very clear that landscaping and other things that would be considered a yard are permitted in setbacks. If that's something we need to go over in more detail as like a general education item, I'd be happy to do that at a future meeting.
We need to, because, and I can explain it this way, because setbacks are required. If that were part of it, we wouldn't have mentioned a yard in the overlay. I mean, it needs to be a discussion, although maybe nothing matters anymore, but when the architect for 15 North Park, and I'll just say this, I don't need to discuss it, in the minutes it said that the backyard was vacant land. That's a perspective saying that a yard is not valued. But I will tell you, from living in this neighborhood for over 30-some years, you cross out of downtown into this neighborhood with trees and yards, the temperature drops significantly. So it's not vacant land that needs to be built upon. It has a purpose, and it's part of the character of this area. And it also makes for better neighbors.
Any other miscellaneous items? All right, we have reached the end of the agenda. Go us. It is now 6:04 on August 21st, 2024, and I declare this meeting of the Heritage Preservation Commission of Flagstaff over. See you guys next month.